If you see the earliest complete maps of the world, you will find a curious region in the south of South America. This is Patagonia, a remote region in the edge of the world, spanning the southern parts of Argentina and Chile. It is a land of staggering beauty and formidable power. Vast, sweeping plains, extensive steppes, and cold deserts as far as the eyes could see. With the majestic Andes Mountains serving as its backdrop, Patagonia was a mysterious yet enchanting region of epic proportions. To this day, Patagonia is a sparsely inhabited region in South America. But even then, Patagonia was an area that was largely unexplored due to its harsh climate and wild terrain. Thus, it was shrouded in mystery and legends, because for centuries, Patagonia was known as the Land of Giants. The early maps labeled it so. But how did it come to be known as the Land of Giants? And how much of it, if any, was true? A giant sighted. You would be surprised to know that rather than just a fanciful addition to the map, like what early geographers used to do in the past, Patagonia was mentioned in not just one, but several historical accounts. Let's start with the sighting that started it all. In July 1520, the fleet led by Ferdinand Magellan encountered a very strange and unexpected sight. Only less than a year before that, Magellan and some 270 crew members departed from Seville to find a western route to the Spice Islands, now known as the Moluccas or Maluku Islands in Indonesia. The fleet faced hardships upon hardships, including a mutiny Magellan barely quelled on Easter in the same year. Magellan was already hard-pressed to find a passage across South America and finally reach Asia. At the time, they had no idea yet that they still had to cross the largest ocean in the world. And yet, Magellan was adamant about finding that route. It was the height of winter in the southern hemisphere, and the succeeding months would be fatal if they continued to press on without passing the season. And so, they did. A few months into their stay on that uncharted territory in the southern edges of the world, they witnessed something that was so shocking and would still remain a big mystery to this day. What Magellan and the rest of the crew supposedly saw on that foreign land that chronicler Antonio Pigafetta immortalized in his journal was a creature that was believed to have been entirely mythical. They saw giants. Antonio Pigafetta. Born in the late 1400s to a prominent noble family, Antonio Pigafetta was an Italian scholar from the Republic of Venice. In 1518, Pigafetta went to Spain and received news about a certain Portuguese explorer who was intent on finding a route to the Spice Islands in Asia by going west. The Magellan expedition between 1518 to 1521 had a significant impact on the world at large. After it proved that circumnavigation around the world was possible, the world entered a new age. More trade routes were opened, and global navigation through the seas became the norm, as Spain solidified its status as one of the major superpowers of the world at the time. Pigafetta was known as a diligent and accurate recorder of events. Despite the many hardships the crew faced, from storms and diseases to mutiny and war, Pigafetta managed to write a reliable log without fail. While he included personal observations and reflections in his journal, Pigafetta wrote everything that he thought was either helpful or important, including language translations, local customs, and descriptions of new territories, including the people that inhabited it. Thus, when Pigafetta wrote about the strange event in the winter of 1520 in South America and published it for all of Europe to read, everyone was astounded. The Patagonian Giants. Almost a year into the voyage, Pigafetta, Magellan, and the rest of the remaining crew members headed south to the Antarctic, skirting along the eastern side of South America, before deciding to halt at a port they named San Julian to pass the winter. After 2 months of not seeing anyone in that port, they saw another human, except that this one was around 6 feet 7 inches tall. Here's how Pigafetta described their first encounter with the supposed giant.
Departing thence as far as 49.5 degrees in the Antarctic heavens, as we were in the winter, We entered into a port to pass the winter and remained there 2 whole months without ever seeing anybody. However, one day, without anyone expecting it, we saw a giant who was on the shore of the sea, quite naked, and was dancing and leaping and singing, and while singing, he put the sand and dust on his head. Our captain sent one of his men towards him, whom he charged to sing and leap like the other to reassure him and show him friendship. This he did, and immediately the sailor led this giant to a little island where the captain was waiting for him. And when he was before us, he began to be astonished and to be afraid, and he raised one finger on high, thinking that we came from heaven. He was so tall that the tallest of us only came up to his waist. However, he was well built.
Of course, the sight of a towering human being frightened everyone. Yet, they were also curious and interested at the same time. To calm down the giant, Magellan showed him objects they brought with them, including 2 bells, a mirror, a comb, and a chaplet of beads. Afterward, they sent him back to the island. Seeing this, some of the giants who were actually observing nearby came forward, including the women of their tribe. Pigafetta noted that while the women weren't as tall as the men, they were still significantly larger than the average European sailor. They evidently had their own culture and could somehow converse with the Europeans despite the language barrier. Pigafetta even picked up a few words from them and included them in his journal, including the name of a deity called Setebos. For the first several days, it seemed that the Europeans and the supposed giant natives in that region got along well. They even baptized the first giant they saw, gave him the Christian name John, and taught him to say Catholic prayers. Magellan also gave him more of their belongings, particularly a shirt, tunic, and breeches, possibly with the intent to convert the other natives just as he did to John. This action, however, led to very tragic consequences. John never returned. Pigafetta and the others surmised that he was probably killed by his tribe for befriending the foreigners. However, this was purely speculation on their part, as John was never seen again and nobody could tell them what happened. The worst was yet to come, because some 15 days later, Magellan decided to abduct 2 of the 4 giants who came to the shore on their own accord. His purpose? Of course, to bring them back to Spain and show them to the king. In his writings, Pigafetta insisted that they detained the giants in a gentle and cunning way, aka by distracting them with interesting objects and chaining them in irons. Of course, the giants weren't too happy with the kidnapping. A commotion and fighting ensued, causing the death of 1 sailor. Long story short, the fleet left the port after a scuffle with the enraged natives, but not without successfully bringing the 2 giants. Magellan seemed to have placed them on one of the ships back to Spain. However, the 2 died en route to the Old World, possibly by succumbing to diseases they had no immunity against. Regardless, the 2 natives they kidnapped died, and along with it was their proof of the giants they saw in South America. Magellan, Pigafetta, and the others pressed on after finding a passage to the Pacific. That region where they saw the giants was then named Patagon, also known as Patagonia. Nobody was sure why he named it that way, although there are 2 proposed reasons. One was that Patagon came from the Portuguese word pata, which means feet. People believed that Patagonia might have meant land of the big feet. However, the suffix "gon" didn't seem to check out. Another, less known possible reason was that Magellan might have drawn inspiration from Patagon, a literary character from the 16th century Spanish chivalric romance Primalion. As an explorer, it was possible that Magellan might have read the book and used it to call the supposed giants in South America. Whatever the reason is, the name stuck. The region was since then called Patagonia, and the giants that supposedly lived there were also called the Patagonian Giants, or simply the Patagonies. Was the Patagonian giant real, or was it just a colossal myth? As astounding as this story was any of it true? What we know was that, after Magellan and Pigafetta, several historical figures also recorded sightings of the Patagonian Giants. In 1579, famous English privateer and navigator Sir Francis Drake mentioned very tall indigenous people in the Patagonian region during his own circumnavigation, recording their heights as 7 feet tall and a half. Another English adventurer, Anthony Knivet, also claimed to have seen giants during his stay in South America in the 1590s. More interestingly, he is also said to have seen dead bodies measuring 12 feet long in Patagonia. Then another Englishman, William Adams, witnessed the crew of the Dutch ship he boarded fighting against some unusually tall natives in Tierra del Fuego, part of the Patagonian region, also in the 1590s. Other explorers also mentioned giants in their narratives, including French explorers Louis-Antoine de Bougainville and André Thevet, Dutch sailors Jacob Lemaire, Willem Schouten, Sebald de Weert, Olivier van Noort, and Joris van Spilbergen, and another English privateer, George Schelvocke. The list goes on, and these claims continued on until the mid-18th century when John Byron, grandfather to the poet Lord Byron, came into the scene. When John Byron was set to return to England in 1766, rumors began to spread that the crew witnessed 9-foot-tall giants in South America. Of course, this caused great excitement, and it was also the first version everyone heard of. However, only a few years later, the official account of the voyage was revised, and from 9 feet, the giant's supposed height was reduced to 6.5 feet tall. As more and more skeptics pointed out that the previous explorers and chroniclers might have only exaggerated the features of the natives, the public's interest in the Patagonian giants gradually died out. People soon came to agree on the most reasonable explanation: Pigafetta, Magellan, and everyone who followed suit in claiming they saw giants might have only embellished their tales at the sight of such tall people. To be fair, the average height of European men in the 1500s to 1600s was around 5'5" to 5'8" tall. Seeing a group of people whose height averages at least 6.5 feet was extraordinary. Moreover, there were also certain prejudices held by Europeans against the natives. The striking difference in their physical attributes, particularly the natives' towering height, might have fueled their misconception by seeing them as threatening and outright dangerous. And with South America largely unexplored, people were free to imagine what they want about the New World. In fact, recent studies suggest that the giants Magellan and his crew saw in Patagonia, as well as the rest of the explorers, might have been either the Tehuelche or the Selknam people, who are indigenous to the Patagonian region. Both the Tehuelche and the Selknam people were known to be incredibly tall. The average individual of the Selknam people was Zesautan, while the Tehuelche people at the time of Magellan's arrival had a reported average height of 6'7". With these, the likelihood that the early explorers might have indeed only exaggerated the descriptions of the natives seemed like a sufficient explanation. For some explorers, it might be true as well. There is one problem, though. Some chroniclers, particularly Pigafetta, took great pains in describing the giants that they encountered in great detail. For someone known to be meticulous and accurate in his descriptions of everything, albeit biased, towards his commanding officer and home continent, it was a big blunder for him to embellish details about the Patagonian natives. Here are some of his most notable descriptions of the supposed giants. These women are not as tall as the men, but are sufficiently large. When we saw them, we were all amazed, for they had the breasts half an ell long and had their faces painted and were dressed like the men. The ell was a former English unit of measurement that roughly equates to 45 inches. Here are some of his descriptions of the first giant they encountered, whom they named John.
He had a large face, painted red all around, and his eyes were also painted yellow around them, and he had 2 hearts painted on his cheeks. He had but little hair on his head, and it was painted white. When he leapt, he caused the earth to sink in a palm depth at the place where his feet touched.
Giants around the world, a big possibility. While Pigafetta might have actually embellished the tale, either due to the shock of seeing towering individuals or to make it more appealing to his audience, it's still certainly worth noting that others who have followed suit were also consistent in their descriptions, despite being recorded decades and even centuries apart. True, a number of people disputed and debunked the claims later on, but it's hard to dismiss a considerable number of experienced sailors and explorers giving a consistent description of these supposedly gigantic people. But if they existed, where are they now? What happened to them? If they did indeed exist once upon a time, like how Pigafetta, Magellan, and the other early European explorers adamantly say they did, then it's likely they were driven to extinction. Whether by invasion or natural causes, we don't know, not until we see definitive evidence of their existence. Let's not forget that stories of giants were widespread all over the world. Myths of colossal beings were in almost every culture, despite being separated by vast oceans and impossible terrains. While these were merely myths, sometimes they could be hiding a grain of truth in them, a behemoth, forgotten truth lost to time. Until then, all we have to do is wait and keep searching for the truth everywhere. If the topic of giants is interesting for you, you will find dozens of videos about them in our channel.